This is my 2022 Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. It is the standard against which I will judge all other motorcycles for as long as I ride. And tomorrow, I'm trading it in. Stick around to find out why. Okay, so let's just get the specs out of the way and then we'll really talk about the bike. So the engine is a 648cc parallel twin fuel-injected oil-cooled engine. It's a 9.5-to-1 compression ratio with a 270-degree crank, which gives it that V-twin sound. It's 47 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, 52 newton meters of torque at 5,200 RPM, and 80% of that torque is available at 2,500 RPM. The transmission is a 6-speed assisted slipper clutch. It has 18-inch front and rear tires on spoke tube wheels. The brakes are a 320 millimeter single front disc with a 240 millimeter rear twin piston bi-brake calipers and Bosch ABS. It's 445 pounds dry with a 3.6 gallon fuel tank and about a 31-inch stock seat height. The fuel mileage I get is around 200 miles to a tank, so about 55 miles per gallon. The maintenance cycle is a 300-mile break-in where the primary points of that are an oil change and tappet adjustments. So after that is about a 6,000 mile maintenance interval. The price is $6,000 US. So if you want one of the fancy colors, that goes up extra couple of $100, and then of course you add on taxes and dealer fees. So as I like to say, good news, bad news first. So let's start with the complaints. As a 6-foot tall rider, I find the rider triangle on this thing to be a little bit tight. I think if you're 5'9" or 5'10", you're gonna have enough room to stretch out and be comfortable. Although Royal Enfield does refer to the setup on this motorcycle as a gentle sport bias. So there is a little bit of a forward lean. There is an expectation that you're gonna be pushing the bike more like a sport bike than you would like a long distance cruiser. One other thing is that the foot peg position does take a little bit of getting used to. When you come to a stop, your leg wants to naturally fall right where that foot peg is, and you kind of have to get used to putting your foot in front of where that goes. Another thing, there's no gear indicator. And it doesn't seem like that big of a deal because once you get used to riding it, you kind of know which gear you're in most of the time. But there is that nice to have where you just want to look down at the gear indicator and know which gear you have. Probably my biggest complaint is the fuel gauge. So I find myself, it's fine as long as I've got 3 bars or better, but once I get down to 2 bars on the fuel gauge, it seems to have a mind of its own. It will go from 2 bars, and there is no just 1 bar, it's 1 bar flashing. And so it's like emergency, but there's no emergency because in just a few minutes it's gonna go back to 2 bars or maybe even 3 bars. So the gas gauge, and this is, a difficult thing to get right, but it took me a long time to figure out what my mileage was on this motorcycle because I did not trust the gas gauge. The seat. I have the touring seat on this bike, and the premium touring seat does add some comfort to it, but the nature of this style of seat is a little bit like riding a mule. It is not delicate in delicate places, and so I end up after even sometimes 45 minutes of riding having to take a break, depending on the day. But the stock seat is even less comfortable. And so if you're gonna ride this bike for longer periods of time, it may be worth investing in something like a Corbin or a Sargent seat that gives a little bit more surface area and spreads out the weight. And the last thing about this bike that just makes me nervous, and it shouldn't be as big of a deal in my head as it is, but it's the tube tires. If I run into a true flat situation, the wheel has to come off. Wheel has to come off, the tire has to come off of the wheel. I have to have a tube with me, or at least have a tube patch kit, which is a squirrely situation, patching a tube. Then you gotta put the tube on, get the tire around the tube, get all that set back on the wheel, reinflate it, and then put the wheel back on the motorcycle. It seems daunting to me to be on the road, especially far from home, and have a flat tire situation with tube tires. That said, this bike is built to a price, so I can understand why that decision was made. All right, so let's talk value for money for 1 second. $6,000 is a very reasonable entry point for motorcycling. If you're buying this as your first big boy bike, you're getting a lot of value for the money. There's plenty of power to keep you busy. There's all kinds of upgrades and accessories you can put on this bike. It's a fantastic platform, 3-year warranty, and it's gorgeous. I think that this is a fantastic value for money. It's not the most powerful bike. It's not a bike that's just gonna beat out the competition on every performance metric, but it is, for $6,000, a darn good value. But as my Little League coach always said, it's the little things, the plastic turn indicators, the slop in the throttle tube, the old school halogen headlight and bulbs. The bike doesn't lack quality. Overall, it's dependable, it's powerful, and it will take a serious beating. It's just not built to the same price point that a Bonnie or a BMW is. This is a great option if you're looking for a standard motorcycle. The sound. I love the sound of this bike. The 270-degree crank gives a V-twin rumble. It's a subtle whine on the stock exhaust, but that is easily remedied with a set of aftermarket pipes. And you could do a full pipe kit or just a set of slip-ons. But even in stock form, I appreciate the exhaust's polite rumble and iconic style. Speaking of style, the style is a true to retro styling 60s British heritage feel. The polished aluminum and chrome make for a true head turner. There's something about shiny chrome that draws people in. Even at the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride recently, which is a classic bike festival of sorts, people were genuinely curious about the Royal Enfield. As popular as it is with motorcyclists, there are still a lot of motorcyclists who don't know about Royal Enfield yet. And so the look and the feel of this bike just draws people in. I mean, they were genuinely asking, oh, so this is a 2022 model? Yeah, absolutely, fuel injected. Big win for me, because I don't do carburetors. So it is the perfect blend of nostalgic novelty and practical technology. I do want to make a quick note. If you're this far in the video, I would really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button and like this video. That tells YouTube that you and I are getting along and that you would like to see more content like this. I appreciate you watching and subscribing. Thank you so much, and on with the video. Okay, so the real question here is, what's it like to ride this thing? On the commute, the Interceptor is the perfect daily companion on the way to the office. The assisted slipper clutch makes getting in and out of traffic super easy, barely an inconvenience, and clicking through the gears while you're moving through said traffic is joyful. There's something so satisfying about the way this motorcycle clicks into gear. That said, you will likely be wearing a backpack because luggage options are a little limited. I have pannier racks for this, but finding you will need to invest in a good set of panniers if you're going to stick with this platform. The upswept exhaust does limit the kind of luggage options that I found I was comfortable putting on this bike. In the twisties, and this is really where I think this bike was made to be enjoyed. And it is not the perfect motorcycle. It is not the most performance and competitive based, but I can tell you that the power is there. This thing eats at 5,000 RPM all day long. The suspension can be a little squishy. The brakes can be a little wooden, but you can push this bike really, really hard. I've taken it to the North Georgia mountains and gone through the Richard B. Russell Highway, and I was not disappointed in the least. There is so much joy in riding this bike through a twisty road. So I have talked about this in a separate video, but I'm gonna bring up the Interceptor's off-road capability. I've obviously added knobby tires, which gives me a little bit more traction off-road. But here, let me grab the stock. Here's the stock rubber. You probably can't, I'll get a B-roll of that. There's nothing wrong with the stock rubber. I knew I wanted to do a little bit more off-roading with this bike than what I thought the stock tires would really be enjoying doing, but there's not, ground clearance is an issue. The suspension is an issue. Just the general way this bike was made. It's just not made for heavier off-road riding. So, as I've said in the other video, if you really want to do off-road riding, get a different bike. If you want to do some light gravel trails, absolutely. You don't need these tires to do basic gravel trails on this bike. You can absolutely do that. So on the highway and touring. And this is why this bike is going back to the dealership tomorrow, and I'm picking up something very different. I have the Himalayan, and we can talk about that. That's also not a great touring option in my opinion. This bike's got plenty of power to handle the highway. I can easily break the speed limit, okay? It's gonna do all the speed that I would wanna do. No problem keeping up with and passing on highway traffic. I've loaded this bike down and taken it on camping trips and taken it on touring trips. It could do it. The seat is not comfortable enough for me for a longer trip. The ergonomics are a little tight. My knees are a little more bent than I want them to be. It's just not quite made for it. There's no wind protection, and you can be okay with that, right? Like, look, you can do it. You can tour on this motorcycle. It's completely doable. For me, it's not the right answer. That said, what I'm gonna go treat it in on is a much more expensive bike. And so if I was limited on budget, and I needed the power, and this bike was the best option I could do. I could put a duffel bag on the back of this thing. I've added a rack to the back of it. You don't even necessarily have to do that, but I could put a duffel bag on the back of this thing and head out on a tour and be just fine. I may have to stop a little bit more often. I may have to get rest a little bit more, but this bike will do a solid tour. I'm absolutely sure of it. That leads me to why I'm letting go of my beloved Interceptor. I picked up the Himalayan at the beginning of the year and did so much more off-road riding, was so much more comfortable off-road, and that kind of reinstated in my head the kind of riding I really wanted to be doing. Limits me off-road and it limits me touring. And it's a wonderful bike, but I find it sitting in the garage more often and me taking my Himalayan out or looking for a different route or limiting my trip options because of what the Interceptor can't do as well as other bikes. I will miss the charm. I will miss the unique character. The Interceptor will always be my first love when it comes to motorcycles. The bike delivers so much joy every time I take it out. It pains me to say goodbye to Little Blue. There are just too many factors that are limiting the kind of travel I want to do with my motorcycle. Until next time, ride safe out there. Okay, so just real quick, if you made it to the end of the video, I got the Husqvarna Norden Expedition. Lots of videos coming on that. See you next time.